found footage genre, popularized by the likes of Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity, along with many others. We're starting to rack up increasing amount of success and cash from box offices. The main gimmicks of these flicks were the use of homemade or service cameras, false evidences, and content on the internet, and pure authenticity of actors along with material presentation. This was done in order to improve the masses into believing that the footage was real, which in result gives us a much more harrowing look and gives us a very good sense of disturbance and immersion, unlike a regular horror movie. When you watch a found footage film, you don't feel like a spectator amidst the masquerade of actors. You feel like you're in the midst of a dangerous and horrifying reality that is bestowed upon your very eyes. And a range of scary encounters will feel almost physical and exhilarating. Many credit the boom of the genre thanks to the Blair Witch Project, but what popularizes a genre isn't necessarily a foundation. To be frank, neither is the subject of this video, but it is certainly the one which puts a unique twist on things and cements a style, which established this genre as a force to be reckoned with. The last broadcast, whilst being the first authentic found footage film, was at least preceded 19 years before in the genre, with the release of a controversial exploitation flick called The Cannibal Holocaust. Grisly film about human crimes and savagery, mass media ignorance / corporate mindset, and all of hypocrisy. It was a film depicting murder, rape, mutilation, and most importantly, human nature at its most secluded. All of this with inconsistent first-person camera lenses. Whilst innovative in its approach to filmmaking and using cinema verite along with using inexperienced actors to convey realism, a lot of acting in the movie still feels like viewing a story in third person with occasional switches to first-person view. Along with that, there was an external build-up that all these footages were real, aside from the movie footage itself, which was still deemed real but until disproved by the actors. This idea would later be snatched by the later iterations of the genre in 1999. But before all of that, in 1998, the world was graced by the most ambiguous footage we've ever seen. Teaming up with an amateur director and actor, Steven Avalos, himself an inexperienced director, Lance Wheeler, sought an idea which would make him grow at least $5 million in return. The film would be issued digitally, making it one of the first internet movies ever. Lance and Steven made something which was more civilian great and didn't require all the shenanigans and necessities like high funding / budget, fancy equipment, and expensive actors. All the magic was conducted with home PCs, samples of urban machinery, sounds, and simplistic special effects using popular software like Adobe Photoshop, which honestly, come to think of it, and the movie's finance gains, is absolutely crazy. Actors were simply family members and friends of both directors with zero experience. All of this with $900 of budget. Lance also employed the use of custom and tailor-made website, housing information about the movie events and merchandise, along with behind-the-scenes features. This tactic of internet promotion would later also be employed by the following films in a way that presented itself as false news sites. Movies like Cloverfield and Blair Witch Project were the ones to incorporate that kind of commercialism. The movie's final launch was to be a mix of documentary and found footage, with the style consisting of first-person and cinema verite. The film in question, and one that we are discussing right now, was titled The Last Broadcast, airing on March 9, 1998. Mediocre reception, good finance gains, and a nomination at Cannes Festival more or less made it a cult classic. So, how does it feel? The story goes about a group of paranormal investigators from Fact or Fiction, a fictional group operating a show solely on the internet, went missing and were found dead later on. The group went to the New Jersey Pine Barrens in hopes of hunting down the Jersey Devil, with a request of an unknown IRC viewer recommendation, only for things to take a mysterious and dark turn. It culminates in the murder of co-host Locus, played by Lance, the sound capture and disappearance of main host Steven, played by Stefan, with only one suspect and survivor to blame, that being their psychic Jim. With the evidence piled up against Jim, the court sets him into a prison where he dies very in mysterious circumstances. The matter of his murder is taken into the hands by a documenter, David Lee, who claims to have received a busted-up videotape claiming that it could solve a mystery, but things in the end aren't what they seem, as the voice of the story reveals his true identity. Not long after the title rolls out, and we get introduced to our documenter, David Lee. The documentary immediately starts to feel cold and morbid, dead serious and non-sensationalist, almost silent in its atmosphere at times, which is a stark contrast to the overproduced shows and documentaries made at the time. Lee seems to be monotonic but somewhat enthusiastic. He's a perfectly mendacious force. His documentary has an amateurish style with lighting and equipment, which almost seem like a homage to a victim style of filming. The documentary tries to diversify itself when it moves to true crime and paranormal themes, which leads to an ambiguous quality of the whole thing. But the documentary also throws subtle insult cues at the viewer about the crew of the show. More about that later. Footage of the crew shows all four of them dominating with childish, delusional, naive, and weird behavior, along with very ambitious struggles. This establishes them as likable despite not knowing much about their personal life. Every footage of these guys emanates a sense of innocence, determination, and a sense of playfulness. However, our senses are immediately shaken by the footage of the night in the pine, as all of this innocence and naivety is flushed down a bloody sewer. The pictures of the victims are revealed, grimness in the tone of a movie ensues. The mystery unfolds slowly and slowly. Each step closer increases both hope and tension, as well as closure for the case. Along with all the footage and conversation about the group, the documentary also includes insight and theories about the murders, from regular civilians to experienced state officials. As a viewer, you gotta remember that these people are not actors. They're not rookie actors cosplaying journalists with expensive equipment. They are who they are, just normal people, relatives and friends. The acting has times go into uncanny valley territory, because on the surface you know it's an act, but deep down you know it's also genuine due to how non-exaggerated it feels. Adding to the realism is the way everything is shot with cameras, which according to Lance was 8mm baby cameras, giving it even more believable and amateurish look which perfectly ties into the whole low-budget internet show thing. Quite ahead of its time, if you ask me. Considering most movies of that era dealt with more surrealism, cheesy effects, and exclusive third-person POVs. In the departments of special effects, we are introduced to rather outdated antique special effects, off-screen manipulation, and somewhat effective glitch effects, which contributes to a whole found footage feat. In short, the dominant era of a movie is a gloomy one, which absolutely gets intensified at the end. The combination of simplistic effects and amateurish acting and play into the role that all of this is a job of a single schmuck, and compared to what came before, it is much more consistent. That is until the very end, where a perspective switches to third person for a grand reveal of a killer, and even meant that it doesn't increase the quality to a professional level, which may imply second person being at work here. The set of characters in the last broadcast comprises an array of the show's members, fact or fiction that is, from gullible, cheery, and desperate hosts and members, to professionals keen on solving and debunking the mystery, the occasional outsiders from local civilians to news broadcasters and more. Stevens, became Johnny, and Locus's charismatic attitude and ambitious mindset on the screen was just a layer of their actual desperation and roughness behind the scenes. Their show started eventually losing popularity and even funding, leading the crew to take breaks and even making the bribes to one of the big dogs in the entertainment industry. One day, a sudden revival would put them to the grave. Steven and Locus both shriek of naivety and don't seem to be taking their roles seriously, and treat the job as an expeditionary playground. All of this with genuine care for material and quality. Especially Locus, who is genuinely trying to make loose ends connected and fixed. Jim Surrey, on the other hand, is an oddball, a practitioner of magic and a trickster. He seems to be the most quiet about some of the most disconnected, delusional, and anxious, often seeing and feeling things that aren't there, and seemingly running away from others, secluding himself in his own mind. For a viewer, Jim is a perfect suspect. Disturbed, he is the only survivor and has blood samples on his garments. And for the first part, this expectation works perfectly well, until you realize that he was not adapted to large groups and preferred to hide, which dismisses the fact that he was a killer. The team unconsciously follows Jim throughout the story, being fascinated by his trickery and visions, convincing them into believing that he's some sort of human gateway to another dimension. Nobody realizes that he's probably mentally ill and scarred from his past, only to be dismissed as a weirdo, which just cements the fact that these guys were not the ones with the most brains, and were more of a participants in a kiddie affair. Outsiders, on the other hand, seem to be treated with fact or fiction as a complete write-off, a laughingstock, and a dangerous venture, with reckless minds leading the front. You can see that citizens were treating this affair as a passing fad, which seemed to be the gateway to desperation, financial loss, and recklessness for the crew. It's almost like they were shunned and outcast for a nasty fate. Hell, their death came from a viewer's suggestion, which can reinforce the fact that they were nothing but a failure, destined to be sacrificed in the face of others. Just can't knock off the cynicism of some of these people. Through their eyes, you can see that we are treating this case like some sort of kidney mishap. When even the authorities taking this stance, as they not only mock, but also conduct insufficient and clumsy surface-level investigations. The only person who shared a single pity were Jim's psychologist and the tape recovery lady. Locke says Steven's crew was a team of determination, also heavy delusions, but ultimately led them obliviously and unconsciously to their death. They were people simply trying to reclaim their unprofessional but also ambitious show's crown. A crown which no big-budget TV show host had worn at the time. You can see this as also allegory for chasing fame, and ultimately being consumed by the desperation in the form of a killer. A killer which would be on the same page of success, at least in my theory. Following these four feels like a sort of emotional roller coaster of someone following a path of success, only to open a Pandora's box. Our characters seemingly follow a setup as they evolve in the movie, from passionate entrepreneurs to reclusive idiots, and eventually turn into dead meats. These four tell the story of a tragedy whilst being believable at the same time, not dramatic at all. David Lee, on the other hand, is a whole can of worms. At first, Lee's motive is to be that it's a destiny call, which doesn't raise much questions, but later on, he was the one who received the tape. From where exactly and why, it's unknown. You may ask yourself, why was Lee, an unknown filmmaker with a budget of a beer bottle, was chosen? Initially, Lee forces us to believe that Killer tries to claim fame and notoriety, whilst abusing and manipulating Lee's film for him to take the spotlight and appear as an urban legend or even a paranormal mystery. See, this is what Lee wants you to think, because in reality, David's twisted game only puts us more questions than answers, revealing cold and inhuman motives that lie behind that voice of his. Establishing him as a ruthless government manipulator with unknown motives. But one thing is sure, David's clear motive was to capitalize on the story and to create a compelling mystique on the case, which further denotes him as a scumbag, a snake if you will. By now we established that characters present here are very convincing and diegetic, very three-dimensional, giving it a realistic edge, which is enough to sell somebody to convince them that this is a real story. Which may not alleviate the sense of mundaneness and boredom found in the movie, but it is enough to bring you to the end. Till midpoint, the mysterious tape comes into play, a mangled, disheveled mess of black tarp. Lee wants to unravel the mask of a mystery and hands out the tape to a tape recovery specialist named Michelle. Michelle, being the most skeptical of a paranormal and dismissive of a police investigation, tries piecing together the puzzle of the tape by recovering it piece by piece. As people are getting interrogated, as the theories are skimmed and replaced, the tape gets more and more repaired, producing a clear image of a suspect. As the image gradually becomes sterilized from any damage marks, it reveals an assaulter, but the assaulter in question turns out to be David himself. That's right. The voice we've been guided by and enhanced by was the root of a whole murder. In fact, if you listen to Locke's recording about the IRC chat, he mentions someone with the initials of just D, implying that it was David who lured them in, with the false pretense that they were chasing a Jersey Devil. And throughout the documentary, David seems to have the crew in low regards, referring them as an amateur and delusional, seemingly making them out to be an easy-to-kill targets. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Yes, this twist introduces a lot of questions that won't be answered, which makes this case more baffling and ultimately very bleakly ambiguous. But as a viewer, if you get close a bit attention, you may soon realize that actually leaves room to a lot of compelling theories. My theory is that, based on a lot of mockery and attitude from Lee, he wanted to take out lousy competition by producing his own documentary. He would make a lot of cash and live a life of enjoyment and inconvenience, all the while selling the idea of the infamous Jersey Devil. All the while David himself making fun of the people he interviews. After a twist, these jobs feel like threats and people interviewed were clowns in their own circus, incompetent and easy to fool. Although his plan seemingly might fall into complete degeneracy and failure, once you realize that a tape recovery specialist was also murdered by Lee, which will probably arise suspicion as for her murder and disappearance, leaving the tape still intact. A dumb move for an otherwise cold, cunning, and egomaniacal person. Lucas and Stevens' case could be considered a classical type of modern catfishing and baiting. But instead of a romantic setup, it was a paranormal in nature. Instead of lovers and creeps, we have demons and killers. Leslie Stevens' venture with the use of online broadcasting kinda makes them first ever bloggers. In the style of paranormal investigations like what you see on Twitch and YouTube with these fake ghost exploration channels. But the main lesson the film teaches us about the online fiasco is to trust no one. The movie evokes a stronger sense of a stranger danger on the themes of online privacy. The problem is everyone could be that danger and everyone could be voting for their demise. In order to seek closure or to pump up the adrenaline in a sick and perverse way of satisfying one's current addiction to online ecstasy as they watch the people in it burn. By this move, the movie indirectly puts the paranoia of unknown people on the internet and their capabilities beyond their avatar or username. Come to think of it, this movie predicted this exact wave of internet manipulation, subduing and wrongdoings. Just how many people are fooled by those other people behind the screen? How many get hacked, baited, extorted, killed, all because that other occupant of the screen made a promise or a subtle threat disguised as a statement? The answer is unknown, and that's even more scarier than the actual display statistics. It could be 10 or even hundreds, who share the same fate as Locust and Steven. Which makes online presence feel a mystery, as you only have their descriptions, names, and profile pictures to go off. Without knowing their intent, who should you trust and who should you avoid? You'll never know. Since the movie follows a documentary style, it is a natural filled with mystique and a lot of mundane investigations, and can honestly feel like a chore sometimes, especially during the tape reconstruction part, when you feel the urge to wanting the story to wrap up and uncover a mystery as quickly as it possibly can, which can feel tedious, since the recovery is still intercepted by the general theorizing and interviews from outsiders. But the end payoff is more than enough to satisfy any viewer. As mentioned before, it leaves a lot of room for theories, and twist itself is very likely to catch you off guard and make your jaw hanging. That being said, the movie is not bad before a twist occurs. Sure, it is mundane in its storytelling and scenery, but it is not boring enough. It's filled with enough mystique to drag you through the end. This is a movie which, while flawed, was ahead of its time in its technicality, had provoking a worrisome message, and cemented the style for years to come, all the while improving the foundations of the previous works of the genre and adding more authenticity to it. Thanks for watching.